Welcome back to Chris and Retro. I'm going to share with you a lesson that shouldn't be that difficult to understand, but surprisingly it is. If you ever find yourself incarcerated, stay off the phone. If there's a reason that was phone related that got you there in the first place, stay off the phone. We've got some article that came out locally here, and I also have a personal story I'll share with you. But this should be pretty obvious, but we'll learn it apparently is not. Got a little lagging in the video today, so hopefully get this thing to work. So, stay off the phone. And here we've got some life lessons from people that obviously don't think through everything. This subject matter came up today because we had an article that came out this morning out of Hopewell, New York, which is right down the road from here. It's basically the jail. At quarter to 12, actually it was quarter to 12. This article was posted 2 days ago, but I read it today. And this individual right here, Lauren Cheeks, has found himself in a mess here. So he had a domestic issue related to a phone. I believe the initial charge was false imprisonment and theft, burglary. So he got a burglary charge and a burglary and robbery, I think, were the two, because he took a phone from the victim, the false imprisonment or whatever, wouldn't let her out of the house, and had taken something else from the house. So while it wasn't like he was walking around at night breaking into people's homes, it sounded like he had a domestic issue, took her phone, took something from the home, and wouldn't let her leave is what it sounds like to me. So that's what led him all here. Again, that's just my account of reading the article and knowing how this county likes to promote stuff. You would think the guy had, I'm not minimizing what he did, but I'm just saying the way the article read at first, you would think that he basically went on a robbing spree and a burglary spree, in which he did not. It sounds like one incident with one person. So he found himself incarcerated. Then 2 days ago, he got himself more charges. And the headline reads, inmate charged with 358 counts of criminal contempt after making repeated calls from jail. So evidently, and as part of his charge, which is typical with that type of thing, he had a restraining order. So in his genius mind, between December 2024 and February 2024, he decided from the Ontario County Jail to make 358 separate phone calls, violating an order of protection. 358. His bail is set at $1,000 cash, $2,500 insurance, bail bond, $5,000 partially secured appearance bond. He got himself in trouble because he wouldn't stop calling the victim. And now I understand he probably was in love or whatever else is going on here, but either way, just dumb. Now we could stop the video there and say, you dummy, what are you doing? But I got another story here that I find it's interesting and perhaps even more baffling based on the person that I'm going to speak about and his history. So, again, I apologize. I don't know what's going on with my internet today. We're lagging like crazy. All right. So, this is, and I just had the video up. I'm not going to try, or I had the screen up. I'm not going to try to pull it back up again, but I'll tell you about it. So I was incarcerated with a man named Bill Rosica. When I first met Bill in the yard, he'd always sit, he was an older man. He'd always sit by himself in the corner, not really mind his own business. I remember he was always upset, seemed like he was crying pretty easily, but just seemed generally down, and nobody really knew what his charges were. Then as time went on, I realized he was a cop, and started getting information about what his situation was. And I usually just stayed to myself. I was there to do my time and get out. But he was there waiting for a federal sentencing. And come to find out, he'd been involved in a stalking situation, cyber stalking situation, as an active law enforcement officer from his patrol car. And so I will share with you some details about that. So here's the case. It was a federal case against him in Rochester, New York. Bill Rosica, he was 51 at the time, so that means he was about a year younger than I am right now, but he looked way older. Not to say I look young, but he was eventually sentenced to 60 months in prison, 3 years supervised post-release. Now his charge at one point were 10 years or so. So he swung quite a deal. But between February 2016 and March 2017, he was a Irondequoit police officer, which is north of Rochester, and actually in the area where a lot of high crime is as you start getting closer to the city, the actual part of Rochester. But Irondequoit runs right through where a lot of the troubles are. He subjected a victim to relentless campaign directed towards threatening and psychological torturing the victim and injuring, harassing, and intimidating her. Now, this is what's interesting about him, is it wasn't just him. It was an alias that he'd come up with, and her name was Katie something or other. So he was doing this not as Bill Rosica. He was doing it as this Katie person. And the other article, I wish I hadn't shut down. If my internet wasn't giving me a hard time, I'd probably look it back up. But this Katie, he would send emails to his victim as Katie, and then he would send he'd send emails to himself as Katie. So it looked like whoever Katie was harassing both of them. And that was his genius cover for stalking this woman while on duty from his patrol car and other areas. So the charges eventually, he had anonymous emails and texts directing and instructing the victim to commit suicide, unlawfully assessing and attempting to assess the victim's cellular phone online account and attempting to reset the victim's password, unlawfully assessing and attempting to assess the victim's work email and voicemail accounts on several hundred occasions, unlawfully accessing and attempting to access victims' Walgreens Pharmacy and University of Rochester MyChart healthcare account on multiple occasions, unlawfully accessing and attempting to access the victim's Time Warner cable online account on multiple occasions. Rosica also unlawfully accessed the Time Warner account of the victim's family. So he not only was just her, she was going beyond. So whatever the Time Warner account was going to be an issue for. Following the arrest, the defendant made pun intended. The defendant made material of false statements to the FBI. In addition to the investigator, identified that several other victims who were subjected to similar physical and digital harassment over several years before he started stalking this victim. As part of the investigation, the FBI used extensive electronic and physical surveillance. They identified Rosica as a victim, driving by the victim's home on multiple occasions in various vehicles while attempting to disguise himself from detection. They also obtained footage of the defendant buying some of the items used to harass the victim, including a pay-as-you-go credit cards, captured audio recordings and digital charts trying to access the victim's online accounts. The defendant commenced his nearly year-long campaign to harass and torment the victim after she ended a three-year arrangement or a relationship in 2016. So he was a cop doing all this stuff. So the other kid's a kid, obviously had some kind of a relationship there. I don't know the backstory of it, but you can kind of see how a young person would make that mistake if they're whatever the reason was that led to that. A series of events could cause that. Depending on his level of hurt or mental health issues, appealing to get her back and showing his undying love, all these calls, and his sick mind might think it's a good thing when she wants nothing to do with him. And by the way, if you got a restraining order, for all you youngins, you're not actually violating the victim. You're now in contempt of court. It's not the victim's wishes at that point. Your judge has said, knock it off. And you're telling the judge, I'm not going to listen to you. And that guy in jail did it 385 times. Well, so all this is going on, and this is why Bill Rosica found himself where we met and why he was facing charges. So now the jail I was in was a pretty small county jail, and at dinner time, I was a trustee at the point, so they have a lot of the blocks opened up so you could transfer food in between the different blocks as you go. And at the same time, in the individual catwalks, there's TVs in varying places throughout the jail, and the nightly news would come on. Well, there was a day when I'm feeding food, and all of a sudden, Bill Rosica shows up on I think it was Channel 8, because he was an Irondequoit cop, so it's obviously prominent news. And his sentencing was going to be coming up in several months, and he'd had a few court cases and stuff that we'd known he'd been transferred back and forth about. And for the most part, people left him alone because he wasn't really a threat to anybody there, and he was really kind of taking a humble stance, and everybody there was kind of pending bigger things anyway, so the last thing they needed to do was mess with that cop. Well, sure enough, doesn't he, while he's there, get like 30 more charges or some ridiculous amount of charges? It wasn't one, it wasn't twice. It was like 30 some more or 18 more, just some absurd amount of times. He was still trying to contact the victim from jail. So not only have we got to a place where this person had an alias Katie something or other that was alleging that Katie was the one stalking his ex and that Katie was also stalking him. So that little ruse didn't fly and got himself put in jail. Now himself with no alias is calling from a jail phone to try to get a hold of like an actual jail on the wall phone using his inmate PIN number to get a hold of this person, and did it multiple times. And in his infinite intelligence, didn't think that would be a problem. Well, before anybody in the jail population knew that he was really doing this and knew that he had additional charges coming, the first that everybody heard about it was through this newscast at dinner time, with all the block gates popped. Not everybody was free, but the block gates are popped. So there was a lot of ability to communicate between blocks. So as soon as, and I'm not laughing because of the victim, I'm laughing because of the stupidity of certain people. It had nothing to do, I'm not smirking because there's a victim involved here, because it had to be tremendously rough to deal with this situation if you're a victim. For me, I'm just like, you idiot, what are you doing? So anyway, the dinner, everybody's getting their food, channel's playing, all of a sudden Bill's caught all these other charges, and now everybody in the jail's got something to say. And the one that stood out to me even after this time, and this is the advice I'm giving to you now: hey, Bill, stay off that phone. They're screaming, Bill, get off that phone, Bill. Get it, Rosika, get off that phone. I mean, they're just completely just chirping him. There's plenty of other things I won't say on the channel. But the point is that don't be slick. I mean, the sickness that's going through people's head when they're trying to pursue lost love. I mean, I've been in there. I've been that stage too. I've been in a situation where in my active use and my heavy alcoholism that I was, relentless with going after an ex of mine when I was going through my struggle, and we're just not thinking clearly at all. And I'm not proud of any of it. I feel like it was awful behavior, but I had a lot of other things I was doing wrong then too. So it wasn't just that. But in these cases, these men are in sober states and can't seem to get their head straight at all. And so I guess the advice is, first of all, don't do it in the first place. But if you find yourself incarcerated, and especially if you're like in a drug situation where you're dealing or whatever, I've seen guys that were still working through the phone with very obvious code, and was obvious to me. And if anybody was listening in, they weren't that smart what they were doing. It was pretty obvious what they were doing. And just know it's all recorded. And if they're suspicious of it anyway, they're probably going to be watching it anyway. And this was probably one of the crappiest old jails you'd ever be in your life. And they still had all that stuff. So count on the fact that they're going to know what you're up to. And this is obvious to anybody that's spent a lot of time around this type of thing. But apparently to this person that's over now in Ontario County Jail, and to Bill Rosika, former Irondequoit police officer, who had already been nailed through multiple cyber technologies by the feds, thought that he could go to a county jail and make phone calls, the most basic of a technology, when he'd been jammed up for much higher things with complete aliases. I don't get it. And for whatever reason, that didn't add a bunch of additional time, but it did get him 5 years and 3 years post-release. And I think at this point now, he's probably got 1 year to go, unless he did really, really good and they let him off halftime. So anyway, so today's lesson is simply that. It's kind of like, don't be an idiot too. That's the other lesson. But if you're in jail and you've harassed somebody and you've got a restraining order, stop. Even if you're not in jail, just stop. There's no place this is going to go that's going to work out for you, because you're not appealing to the victim for their good favor and love. The judge is telling you knock it off, and now you're violating the judge and the court, not the person. So if you have no respect and think you're winning over the love of this other person with your ridiculous pursuit, the judge doesn't love you, and they're going to come after you. So if you find yourself in a bad way, your best bet is to stop, course correct, and find a better way to live. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Today's video is more, I think, probably just more observation after seeing these articles, and with my personal experience with it, was just like, how many times this got to happen before people get it? Anyway, between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do everything I can to stay out of trouble, and I hope you do too.